Well, today we're going to be making a hickory longbow. Now, this particular stave came from a kiln-dried board of hickory, and I'm going to talk a little bit about wood selection. When you're selecting a board to make a bow out of, you want to really focus on the grain of the board. What you're going to look for on a good quality bow is the straight vertical grain here. You want the grain to be as straight as possible without much runoff, and a runoff is where the grain actually starts to tilt up over this edge. That's going to make your bow weaker, and it's going to make the tillering process, which is the process of bending the bow, much harder. These are the tools that we're going to be using today. We're going to start off with the Stanley Sureform. And we're going to use this actually to remove most of the wood on the bow. It's the tool that we'll be using the most. We use it actually like a plane, but instead of a plane, we actually have a lot of little small cutting surfaces. What this is going to do is cut little slivers of wood and bring them up through the plane in a spiraling motion. Now next we have the farrier's rasp, and the only thing we're going to use this for is to file down the tips of the bow after we put the nocks on. Now the next three tools that we have are the ruler, the straight edge, and the flat pencil. And finally we have the rat tail file, and the only thing we're using this for today is to file in the nocks, and the nocks are what the string is actually going to rest on while the bow is strung up. When I actually start making the bow, I'm going to be going through some terms and using some phrases that people might not understand. So I'm going to go ahead and explain a couple of those before we get going. First, the segment of the bow that actually faces the shooter when he's shooting is called the belly. And what's important about the belly is that it needs to have a strong compression force. And compression means that as you pull it back, it doesn't splinter up. Next, we're going to go with the back of the bow. Now, the back is what does most of the work, and it's the most important part of the bow. It has the most tension under it, and that's actually the tensile strength that we need to have correct on the bow. Finally, we have the handle, and you can see a couple of the lines still from this bow. This was actually a Plains Indian bow that I made. This won't be what we're making an American longbow. Our very first step in the bow making process is called laying out the bow. Laying out the bow is actually where you draw the real dimensions of the bow and you kind of figure out the mathematics of how it's going to look. I've already made some of the lines for the bow making, and we're going to start with the center line. Now this is the line that is probably the most important in the whole bow. It kind of gives you the balance and the measurement process that you need. This is a 72-inch long stave, and the center line is exactly 36 inches in the bow, so it's right in the middle. From that point, we're going to move 2 inches out to the right for the handle and 2 inches out to the left, so we're going to have a 4-inch long handle. The next line that I'm going to talk about is called the mid-limb. This is going to be very important in the tapering process of the whole bow, and it's exactly 17 inches from where the handle ends to the nocks, which are up here. Now where the taper is actually going to begin on this bow is 8.5 inches from the mid-limb. So we're actually dividing the distance from the mid-limb to the end of the handle in half, and that's where we're going to start our side taper down to the points. Now we're actually going to start removing some of the wood. Now what we're going to do with the Sureform is we're actually going to take off wood on the side, and we're going to further that process by actually tilting it up on its corner. And we're going to do that on both sides to make a pyramid, and then we will take that pyramid down flatter. And you'll do this process all the way down to the tips, and you can see as we get tapered more, you're going to be doing a lot more of it the farther you get to the end of the bow. Now that we've taken wood off of the sides of the bow, we're going to start taking wood off the belly on each limb. And what I'm shooting for on each limb is just a little bit over a ½ inch in width. And once I get down to that point, I'm going to start taking more care on the amount of wood that I take off and checking the bend on the bow. And that's when we begin the whole process of tillering. We're going to try to shoot for a pretty equal thickness all the way through. On both limbs, we're going to shoot for kind of a slow taper down to the tip. It's going to be pretty equal all the way, but we're actually going to take off more wood down by the tip, so it's just going to slightly curve down all the way. Next, we're going to go into the floor tillering stage, and you can see that I've already taken off quite a bit of wood on the belly. And we're going to go into what's called floor tillering, and it's not extremely technical. But what we're doing is just kind of testing the initial bend of the bow. And how we're going to do that is you're just going to put it on the ground right next to your foot on each limb. You're just going to press around a little bit and kind of get a feel for where the bow is bending the most and just the strength overall. I'm going to do this a couple times on each limb just to get an initial feel. And see, I can already tell that this limb here is a little bit more bendy. And I'm going to go ahead and designate this limb as my top limb. You want your bottom limb to be Not so much, you want to be, you want them to be fairly equal, but if you're going to have one that's just a little bit stiffer, it's going to be the bottom. And since it's already in that position, I'm going to go ahead and designate this one right here as the bottom. Now we're going to move on into the nocks segment. What I've done is drawn a line about 3/4 of an inch down the tip. And next, I actually made a line about a 1/2 inch down, and I drew a cross on the belly. Now I did the same thing on the back, except for I moved everything up about 1/4 of an inch. And from those lines, on the side here, I drew the difference down, and that's where your file is actually going to take place, is right in that area. Now, we're not going to go extremely deep in here, but we're probably going to go about 1/4 of an inch into the wood. And when you get down closer to that 1/4 of an inch, you're actually going to tail in the file here, because you want the string to come down as it's being pulled. So we're actually going to tilt in each knock towards the belly. And to remove wood, you just keep doing that pyramid, an angle, and then flatten. And now we're going to use the rasp to actually smooth out and round the very tips of the wood down here. Just going to take both index fingers, get a small angle on it, using the flat side of the rasp. Next, we're going to go into what's called the loose string tiller phase of the bow making process. We've got the bow on here. It's not actually clamped on, but it's on here pretty secure. We've got a hook, and I'm going to pull loosely somewhere in between the 14 and the 18-inch mark. You can see right here the left limb is bending more than the right limb, so I'm going to go ahead and make a pencil mark on the right limb. And with that pencil mark, what that means is I need to remove wood off the entire limb. So I've gone ahead and removed some of the wood off the right limb like we talked about. I'm going to go ahead and check the tiller on both limbs. I'm going to pull back to about 23, 24 inches. Well, it looks like the left limb is just a little bit stiffer than the right limb. There's a small weak point over there. So we're going to take a little bit of wood off the left limb, and when we do that, we're going to be ready to go ahead and shoot it. Altogether, the bow took about 6 hours to make. We're going to put the finish on, and that's going to conclude the whole bow making process. I'm John Green, and I hope you enjoyed learning how to make an American longbow.